Bec Cuzzillo is a spiritual business coach for spiritual women who want to build abundant, heart led, sustainable businesses. I was so excited to get to know Bec and chat to her about how she approaches business and marketing because she's publicly progressed her business over the past 7 years, evolving through a few different offers. She began with reiki healings and candles infused with healing energy, expanded into workshops, then one on one life coaching, and has now been a business coach for a few years. Even that description makes it sound like a lot quicker process than it was, but we'll cover how it really happened later in the episode. We also dove into how she uses her podcast as the hero piece of content, which is repurposed into most of her other marketing platforms. Welcome to the podcast, Bec. It's so good to have you.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I'm so excited to pick your brain about all of the different progressions that you've had in your business over the years. But to kick us off, why don't you tell us a bit about your business now and who you are and what you offer now?
Amazing. So I'm a spiritual business coach, which means that I support spiritual women in their business to build, grow, and scale their business to six figures and beyond. And I do that through soulful business strategy, mindset, and energetics. So bringing all of those things together to build and grow your business in a way that feels really aligned and true to who you are and your values.
Amazing. So what's your current approach to marketing? Like what do you think about marketing? Is it more of like part of the ecosystem of business, or is it like a begrudging thing that you have to do? How do you kind of approach it right now?
I feel like my answer to that question would maybe change on the day that it is. You know, if I'm mid-launch and feeling the grind or when you're in a big sales season, I suppose marketing can feel a little bit heavier than usual. But for the most part, I treat it as just something that I do all the time. It's a part of business, particularly, you know, in the online world, we're always marketing. We're never not marketing. I actually saw that recently shared somewhere online, and I have no idea who shared it, but this idea that we're never not marketing um, as online business owners, I think is so, so true. Even if we're just showing up on stories, sharing our life, it's still marketing in a sense. And I suppose I just treat it as such. I think before we hit record, I even said to you, we're never not selling. We're always selling. It's part and parcel of being a business owner. And there'll be times when I know that I'm not as optimistic about it. But generally I feel pretty happy with marketing and approaching it in that way.
Amazing. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, yeah, sometimes it is more intensive, but the rest of the time just kind of accepting it as it comes in, and it's all good. Cool. I love that. So with your business, it didn't start out necessarily as business coaching right from the outset. So why don't you take us all the way to the back to the beginning and tell us about kind of like your why you started your business originally and your offer that you started with.
Mm. So I've definitely had an interesting business journey, and it might surprise people to hear where I started, because it was not, I would never have thought I would end up here. I would never have said it was over 7 years ago now. In 7 years' time, I'm going to be a business coach. I would have probably laughed in your face if you told me that. So I started my business as a creative outlet. I was working full time in the community sector, and I wanted something that was a little bit lighter on the side. So working in the community sector space, I was working in youth issues, youth justice, youth homelessness, stuff that was really heavy, and I just needed something that was lighter on the side. And I was already trained as a Reiki healer, and I decided to make candles. And I remember this conversation with my partner, and I said to him, I think I'm going to make candles. And he was like, okay. I was also studying interior design at the time at night. And he was like, do you think you should finish your interior design course first? And I was like, nah, let's just roll with this. And I started making candles. And because of my Reiki training and being already, kind of embedded in the spiritual community, it always had this kind of healing energy baked in, and that was the vibe. And I made them for friends, and then I was like, what, maybe I could sell these. And so I kind of started selling them at markets. And then when I launched my online store, we had a launch. So I started in candles, handmade candles that I was pouring in my kitchen in our one bedroom apartment. So very basic. And then I launched those. And what I loved is the creativity side of it. And I used to do, seasonal candles. And then I launched a range of goddess candles. And that's where things started to change for me. So I launched I launched them gradually. So I created these goddess candles. And as I did that, I decided, well, let's do something fun here. Let's host a workshop that goes along with this goddess candle. Now, if you know anything about goddess energy, if your listeners know anything about goddess energy, each goddess has a different vibe, a different energy, a different, the goddess of love, the goddess of transformation, the goddess of abundance. And so I ran a goddess of transformation workshop. And I actually did that alongside my mum. She's a professional psychic medium, which is why I'm embedded in the spiritual community in this way already. And so we ran this workshop and I loved this work. I had found my thing. It was like this light bulb had gone off, and we ran a series of these workshops. We ran them for years actually, and absolutely loved that work. It was really fun doing that with my mum. And what I discovered as women kind of came through these workshops, which were very much personal development, personal growth workshops, is they'd come out the other side and they'd have had this transformation. They came through all of our workshops and they'd had this transformation. And I had people saying to me, can I do some one-on-one work with you? And I was like, oh, well, I suppose we could do that. And I trained as a life coach at that point. And it was at that point that I actually quit my day job. So I got to a point where I was in this space of like, if I want to take my business more seriously, I need more time. And so I'd gradually kind of cut down hours at work. I was, gratefully in a job where I could, do that. And I had lots of flexibility. And then it came to this point where I was like, no, I'm going to quit and I'm going to go all in. And that's when I did my life coaching training and became a spiritual life coach. And so kind of from products, I was still doing my candles at that point as well, from products to workshops to life coaching. And what's really interesting is when women go through that process, often they will come out the other side and go, you know what, I want to do this work too. I've done this healing, I've done this modality, this area really interests me. I want to help people who are in the same place I was, a year ago, and support them. And so they kind of find this new purpose. And then they go to me, hey, Bec, you've started a spiritual business. You're doing this successfully. You've quit your day job, can you help me start my business? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I suppose I could do that too. And I'd had a little bit of experience in that work anyway. My mum being a professional psychic medium, I'd helped her in her business, particularly on the online side of things and the social media side of things. I didn't talk about the fact that I'd also had at that time, I was a blogger, a travel and food blogger, a little like micro influencer in my local town. And so I'd had some experience in that space as well, which I brought across to business. And so it kind of was this really nice meeting of all of my experience. And as soon as I started doing that work, again, I had that moment of, oh, this is the thing, this is it. And when the pandemic happened, I kind of got more focused in on business coaching, and I supported a bunch of my community to bring their businesses online, and then kind of from there grew and developed the business model that I have today.
Amazing. So it sounds like until you started the life coaching portion, you still had your like quote unquote day job.
Yes.
How are you fitting it all in?
That's a good question. I was also still studying 2 nights a week as well, which is wild to me when I think about it. I didn't have kids then, so I feel like that there's that element of having more time. But I spent a lot of time on my weekends doing things. We used to do markets on the weekends. I would make candles in the evenings sometimes. But I kind of went from working 5 days a week to then working 4 days a week and then working 3 days a week. And then I quit. So I had this really nice progression, which I know is not like the reality for a lot of people, not having a workplace who's going to be like, yeah, sure, you can just work half the hours. I was very grateful to be in a position where, my workplace was very flexible in that way. And so I negotiated that and had that as kind of, this really nice progression. But I did do, I would take holidays and work on my business. So, but I loved it as well. And for me, I think it was this real drive to, build something that was just for me, that was just this, like, there's always been for me this real desire to make my business something that supports me in my life. I've always approached it in that way. And so while, I like taking holidays now and having time away from the business, and I think it is important that you have some time off, I do love working, and I do love building. I do love the business building side of things. And actually, this is something I talk to my clients about a fair bit, because, so often you get into business because you're really good at what you do. You've got these skills, you've got this passion, you want to help people. The business side of things is often the bit where you don't necessarily know what you're doing yet, and you learn those things. But if you want to be successful in business, you've kind of got to love the process of business building, I think, because it is a big part of the work you'll do. As we talked about, like, you're never not marketing, you're never not selling. And if you really, really, really hate those things, like, you've got to find a way to make them work for you. Otherwise, like, I don't know if entrepreneurship is going to be the space for you, because we got to do it, right? Unless we can outsource it, I suppose, and there is that element of it. But for a period of time, if you're a solopreneur, you're going to be doing those things.
For sure. And I think there's an element too of like, part of that is the core difference between, like, say, having a day job and having a business, is that by being your own boss, you can maybe set your own schedule and all of those things without negotiating it with someone. But with that comes the extra business stuff that your boss would otherwise be doing. And so sometimes it's a trade-off, and sometimes you don't love the, bookkeeping and the filing your GST and the whatevers. But if you aren't in a place yet where you can outsource that and fully delegate it to the point where you don't even have to think about it potentially, that's just part of being a business owner, and it's kind of what you signed up for. And sometimes it is a surprise. So sometimes people are like, oh, I didn't actually realize I was signing up for this. But that's the trade-off of like, okay, but now you don't necessarily have to have like your annual performance review and like ask every time you want to have time off and then worry whether your boss is going to say yes or no, or any of those kind of things. And so it's a trade-off, but we do very quickly forget all of the things that we no longer have from being in a day job. And it becomes a little bit more begrudging. But there is also that thing of like, okay, if you already kind of predict that you might not enjoy those things, maybe using your day job as like essentially like the investor bankroller, so that you can start out by having your VA or whatever do those things while you even still have that day job, so that you and for some people that's like hiring a cleaner, or paying extra for your kids to go to some particular thing that they're interested in, like soccer camp or something, where like, your kid really loves soccer. You're not going to be doing soccer for 4 hours. So you might as well send your kid to soccer camp so that you have those 4 hours back. It's like a win-win kind of a thing. And obviously, different kids at different ages, you can't just send them off to soccer camp when they're like 6 months old. But there are those things of like, okay, well, how can I make this work for everyone in my kind of like ecosystem, or how can I make this work for the different parts of me as a human? How can I make this work for my business in a way that brings some more alignment? And sometimes it's just the thing of like sitting down and going, okay, I'm not loving this thing. How do I improve a piece about that? And so like, I'm not loving this part of my day job, or my day job is draining me in some element. How can I do something on the side that fuels me, even if that's not a business that's going to one day replace your day job? And then there's also the like that thing, which I think is probably some kind of like reel or TikTok sound at the moment, that's like, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life, when really it's like, find a thing that you love and you will work all the time. It will be the thing that you put all of your creative energy into. You'll love spending your weekends doing it, and you'll actually spend more time than like the 40 hours of a day job to do it, because you love it so much.
And I think the key word you said there or two words, I suppose, is the trade off. Like, you know, there's always trade offs in business. And I think it, there is an element that gets idealized around having your own business, and you know, what we see online, of course, you know, kind of feeds that like highlight reel vision of what it looks like. But there's always a trade-off, and depending on what season of life you're in, that exists, you know. And for me right now, I'm in a season of life where I've got young kids, and so business for me looks very different, and I am constantly thinking about the trade-offs. You know, it's like, well, right now I don't have as much time. I do things like work in the evenings, or you know, squeeze in bits and pieces of work here and there. It's not always going to look like that, and it can be a little bit frustrating on some days where I feel like I'm stretched a lot. But the trade off is, you know, I do that because it means I've got more time with my kids right now. And that's more important to me than, you know, potentially putting my kid in, you know, daycare earlier than I want to. And I'll do that next year. And I'm really excited for that. And there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that comes with. But I don't want to like rush that, you know? And so I've got to constantly, like, you're constantly in this like space of thinking, okay, well, what's the trade off here? You know, if I don't do work this weekend, what's the trade-off for next week, you know? And that's okay. But if you can be really intentional about those decisions, then it's going to serve you really, really well.
Yeah. And also that thing of like having it all means
Mm,
something different to everyone. Having it all for some people is, you know, not having a business, not having a job, being a stay-at-home mother or father. Some people it's having the career while then being able to clock off at 5, like mentally clock off and stop work and not have to think about it. Um, and for some people, it's like, well, I want to build my own thing. And it's just deciding those big things, but also the small little things. Like, what do I want my Tuesdays to look like? What do I want my weekends to look like? What do I want? Like, do I want to make doing my accounting more interesting? And so I'm going to light a scented candle and start with a meditation and make myself a little charcuterie board and turn it
yes.
into a fun thing. Because for me, I'm never going to get the dopamine hit off of the actual bookkeeping, other than probably pressing that like
Yeah.
button that's like submit. Um, and so because that's like 1 second of so much of it, it's like, how can I make the other parts fun? Um, and then, you know, looking at your services and doing the exact same thing of like, how can I make this more fun? I mean, I used to send off marketing strategies to clients in a document, and now I do marketing strategies with clients in a meeting where we build it together. And while I put together a document at the end, I have so much more contact time with my clients. And the initially it was like, well, this will be more interesting and dynamic for me. And then what ended up happening was that
Mm,
they were more bought into it because they had actually been so much more a part of it. And at any point they could say, oh, but that's a little bit too much for me, or I don't really like video, or I don't really want to, like, I want to do podcasting. And then we break down the amount of time they're going to have to spend editing on whatever. And so maybe we land on guest podcasting instead. So they can still have the conversations, but they don't have to like do all the admin. And all of those things flux and change depending on like, do you have a space you can do these things in? Do you have other responsibilities? What kind of personality are you? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And it's so much more tailored than
mm,
like, what is your business type? Because ultimately, who you are as a person and what you want to do will change how you show up for each task. And so it's super important.
I so agree. I so
Yeah.
agree. And just even asking yourself that question of like, how can I make this more fun? How can I make this more interesting? How can I make this, you know, more magical for myself? And often it will be even better for your clients because they'll feel that and get to experience that. And like, it's just, yeah, a win win for everyone, which is awesome.
Yeah. And also, another thing is like the natural progression. Because if you are constantly evaluating things along the way, chances are you'll make slight adjustments that'll bring it more into alignment rather than a one day you're suddenly burnt out and you have to like
Yeah.
burn it down to build it back up again. Um, which is, yeah, feels more like a pivot
Yeah.
than it
Yeah.
does like a progression of sorts. Um, so at what point did you decide, like, I'm assuming now you don't still do all of those various different things. I mean, your
Yes.
core product is your mastermind. How did you decide to let certain things go? Maybe even like your day job?
Mm. So the day job was it was a much more definitive moment. And I remember the moment. So I was actually in Bali at the time, and I had left to go on a holiday to go to Bali. And I'd had the conversation probably only a week before with my boss, which was the the conversation of, I think I want to take some more time in my business. And so, can I reduce another day? And I had approval for it. And I remember going to Bali being like, amazing. When I get back, I'm going to have all this extra time. And while I was over there, I was just like, what am I doing? And I'd already cut down so many hours. And I had this moment of just like, you know what? Even though I've had this approval, I think I'm ready just to let it go. And so it was almost that being able to take that step back, I think really allowed me to make that decision in that moment. And I know so many people will probably have had a similar experience, even if it's not in the exact same decision, having that time away from normal life often gives you so much more perspective on, what's going on, and, what you can do. So that was that moment for me. And then other things in the business have been more of a slow burn. So for the candles, for instance, I didn't close my online shop for the candles until last year, right before my second child was born. And I'd probably had about 2 years of not really doing much in that space. So I was still making a few candles on the side, doing them for special events. I still had a stock of candles that were made, and so I still had the online shop open. And it was as I was heading into my second maternity leave that I was like, this is it. I'm closing the shop. And then when I come back from maternity leave, we will have no more candles. And I remember, in that kind of year leading up to it, I would potentially share about them occasionally. And I would have to kind of be like, just so you know, I also have candles, and this is actually the history of my business. And you probably might not know that because I never talk about these things. Um, and it was at that point I was like, I just need to let it go. And for me, it was very much like a big part of my business journey because it was obviously where I started. And so it probably felt more significant to me. And I had thought I would kind of do a bit of a sale and kind of go out with a bang. And I just didn't do any of that. I just kind of told people, like, this is when the shop's closing. So if you want to get anything before the shop closes, then, this is your time. And then we just kind of took it off the website and didn't really tell anyone. And it was like this very, very unceremonious moment for me. But it was a long time coming. And so I feel like I grieved it almost. And I was very much ready to do that. And for me, because I had my first son kind of 9 months before the pandemic, I was kind of in this space of only really doing like group programs anyway. And so I wasn't life coaching, I wasn't doing one to one business coaching. I had a number of different online programs that I was doing. And then when COVID hit, I did one very small program called Move Your Business Online. And then that kind of nosedived into what was created after that. I created my spiritual business academy program, which is now an online course. And then I created my mastermind, which is called the Spiritual Business Mistress Mind. And so now my business looks like that. But I kind of the life coaching kind of just I let that kind of go, basically because I had a baby and then COVID happened, and I just never really brought it back. So again, all of these different ways that I let different bits of the business go, I suppose. There's never been uh, a singular process. And I think that kind of speaks very much to my business journey of like, it's just been this natural thing that's just happened and just unfolded. And we've just kind of gone with each evolution and each flow as it's happened. And like, while I'm very intentional about what I'm creating next and what I'm doing, I'm also very intentional about, letting those things naturally happen, if that makes sense.
How have you approached things like, because I can imagine there's a certain element, and from what I've spoken to a lot of people about in terms of like leaving their day job, is that they work towards, well,
Mm.
when I leave my day job, XYZ, or when I start offering this program, these things are going to change. So how have you approached like being in the moment and taking um making the most of what it's like currently, because you know that things will change eventually?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like I'm in that space right now because, right now my days and my weeks look so different because, I'm full time with my 10-month-old. And then I know next year we're going to put him into daycare. And so my days are going to look very different. How I manage that, I suppose, is just I have a constant like self-talk going on often. So, being a coach, I often will have these coaching conversations with myself because there are days where I'm like, oh, I just really need some time on my own, like I can't wait. I can't wait until, Hugo's in daycare and I have 2 days where I can just sit and I can do things and I won't have to worry about it. And then I go, don't wish this time away. Like, don't wish this time away. And so, like, it's just this constant, you never, I think the battle often is we think we're going to get to this place where our mindset or our thoughts are just harmonious. And it's just not ever going to happen, right? Like, we're constantly in this space of like working things out and constantly having that conversation with ourselves. And so, like, in terms of, if we relate that to people who are, leaving their day job, there's that thing of like, I'm in this season where I'm currently working and maybe I don't love working in my day job and maybe I don't like these things about it. And I really can't wait until, I'm full time in my business and this is what it looks like. My kind of suggestion to you would be to like, it's so interesting, right? Because there's so many times where that where I will reflect on that being like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I just knew that that paycheck was coming in next week? And so what I would probably recommend you do is kind of sit with all of the things that are really great about having a workplace and, you know, leaning into that and leaning into what you can control. So often when we're in that space of thinking about, oh, I can't wait till this, or what if this, or, all of these things, we're future tripping ourselves almost. Whereas being present, we can only control what we can control. And so if you're really, really unhappy in your workplace, is there stuff you can control about that? Are there things that you can change about that? What are your options? What are your actual options here? Or are you choosing? And this is where, like, when you get really intentional about what you're doing and the choices that you're making, then you kind of take your power back, right? So you're intentionally choosing to stay in your day job because right now it makes it so much easier for you. And if you can be really intentional about that decision and always stay anchored back into that why, like, why am I doing this? Why am I choosing to do this? Then that's going to really help you be in that space in a much more like optimistic, positive way than like, oh, I just can't wait to get out of this. If you can't get to that point, if that why becomes very unclear as to why you're staying there, then it's probably time to look at what you can change in that space. And I know for me, that's what happened. I kind of took that step back, went on holiday, and was like, why am I doing this? Is there any reason why I'm going back just to do 2 days a week? When I could take that leap of faith right now, and there's not much stopping me from doing that. When I had that thought, that was the moment where I went, oh, I'm definitely ready for this, now. And so that's, I suppose, what I would encourage people to do. What's your why? And stay really anchored in that. And if that why is, I'm doing this right now because it makes it so much easier for me to build my business to the point where I am at a place where I can take that leap, then just keep reminding yourself of that and have that conversation with yourself, and really stay anchored in that space and know that it's not forever. And so what can you enjoy about it right now? Even having colleagues and being able to go out for a work lunch or coffee. There's certain things that I know I loved about being in a workplace that you don't get when you're a solopreneur. So enjoy it. Try to.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think too of like, so sometimes you have this thing where, and the day job is such a good example for people who are wanting to move into solopreneurship of, you really want to leave your day job and you really, maybe there's something you don't like about your day job, or maybe you just want the freedom of working for yourself and you want to do more of your business, full time. But sometimes financially, that's not the thing. And so sometimes it's like, well, there are other options because you can get a different job. You could transfer within your company. You could ask for a change in your responsibilities, or anything like that where you actually have more options than
Mm-hmm.
just stay in the job or leave the job, and go into your business full time. Like there are other different ways that you can do it. And also there's all the little nuances of like, okay, but if I just want to buckle down for 6 months and get a bit more savings under my belt or something like that, like how can I enjoy this while I have it? And just being mindful about it so that you don't let the time like slip by essentially
Mm.
in like a these are the good old days kind of way of like, potentially this is the last time I'm going to have an employer and this is the last time I'm going to have, coworkers where I'm not the boss. How can I make the most of that situation? Because I don't know where my business is going to take me, but it's definitely going to look different to
Yeah,
this, so this is the
exactly.
last time I get to do
Yeah.
this. Yeah, yeah. And then how did you approach, obviously with the client feedback situations, like you did your goddess workshops and then people were asking to work one-on-one with you? Along that process, were there also pieces of feedback that, or pieces of information or options that were presented to you that you decided to not take?
Mm, that's a good question. I remember, so one of my big business failures, and it's not even that big, but I remember when my first son was born, in that kind of maternity leave period, I was kind of playing with what I could do. And I had a friend say to me, like, you could just offer, you know, kind of 3 card email readings, and I'd never done readings before. I mean, I can do readings, but I don't offer them professionally. I've never really offered them professionally. You could just do that, and price it at this, which is very low cost, right? Like that's a low cost offer, and do that, and you'll be able to do it. Blah blah. Blah. Anyway, so I took this time. I created like the sales page for it. I created some beautiful imagery for it. I like put it all together. I was super excited about it at the time, and I released it just. I had a Facebook group at the time, and I released it just to the Facebook group. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I hit publish on that post, I felt this like moment of like, oh, like no, this is not for you. And I've not had many moments like that have been so like visceral, like, oh, definitely not for you. And so I put it out there, and like very soon after that, that same day, I went live in the group, and I was like, anybody who's purchased, I think I got maybe like 3 sales or something. Anybody who's purchased, I will like 100%, you know, give you this reading, but I'm closing it and there will be no more of this. And this is why. And then I made it this whole teachable moment. And, we talked about like, doing things authentically, etc., etc. And so, there's definitely like that's like the first example that comes to mind of that kind of thing of like, you know, doing that and going, oh, no, 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 this is not it. This is not it. And I'm really glad I had that experience, because obviously I've got a great story to tell. But that trust in, you know, knowing yourself, knowing what you want to do, knowing how you want to kind of progress. Even if people out there want the thing, even if people are out there are buying the thing, like that's amazing, but it's got to feel aligned and good for you. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to show up for that, in that way. Um, And so for me, particularly now in this season, my business is very much designed around the amount of time I've got. So the way that I run my mastermind is we have a call a week, and then I do one-to-one Slack support behind the scenes. So I use Slack as our messenger app. And so we have a group Slack, and I have one-to-one with all my clients. And I do that like in between stuff, like I'm messaging clients while we're at the swimming pool for swimming lessons, or while the boys are playing in the playroom, I'm there, messaging clients at different times. Sometimes my husband gets home from work and I'm like, okay, I've got to go into the office for an hour and I've got to get some stuff done. And so my business looks very much, and my offers look very much designed around that, with the intention of like, okay, how can I make this the best thing it can be for my clients, but also work for me right now? And this is what, we've kind of landed on. And I think it's always about, when I help my clients create offers, we look at, okay, well, what's your business model look like right now? Is there anything missing? What do you love about the things that you've got in your business? What's working really well for you? What's working really well for your clients? Is there a gap in here that we need to kind of fill? So it might be that they don't have, a mid ticket offer, or they don't have a higher ticket offer, or whatever that looks like. And then it's like, okay, well, what's going to work for your clients? So how do we create this thing that's going to work really well for them? And then often the missing piece is, how does this work for you? Like, it's actually got to work for you. You've got to be able to show up and sell this thing. You've got to be able to show up and serve the clients within this thing. So if you're designing it in a way that, say it's a group program, if you're designing it in a way that has so much one-to-one contact, then, you're probably not going to have as many people in it if it was designed a different way. And that's fine, but it's got to reflect that. And like the purpose of the program has to reflect that, and the outcomes of the program have to reflect that. And so, you've kind of got to be really like looking at all these different things, I suppose. And so I definitely feel like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent with this question, but I suppose for me, it's just about always looking at like the holistic picture of, how is it going to be best for me to show up for this thing? What feels really good, right now? And also knowing, again, that's going to change. And that's a great, exciting thing. It's not always going to look the same.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I think the thing of it's the pieces of the puzzle that work together, and making sure that you're not leaving yourself out of that picture of it's not just about like, okay, well, I've got this kind of pitch and proposition for it. This is the pricing and this is the delivery model, and then I'll figure it out and I'll make it work. It's also about how can I make this how can from the outset, how can I make this work for me? How do I want to work with people? What lights me up? And how will I then be able to serve those people who sign up for that offer better, because it's not just created in a vacuum for what they need and want. It's also about what's
Mm.
going to work for me. And it makes it more
Yeah.
sustainable over time, which then means that when you repeat that offer over and over, you still have the relevant testimonials, because you've been able to, maybe you've slightly evolved it, but it isn't like a thing of like, well, that didn't work, so I've just got to scrap the whole thing, because energetically for me, it was just like not aligned. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I love that.
Mm.
When it comes to your marketing, how are you balancing all the different things of like the different platforms, and making sure that you do your podcast and all of those different types of things? How are you prioritizing things within the business so that you still have time to market your offers?
Great question. So, the way that I see kind of my content marketing is that my podcast is like the hero piece of content. So, that's where I personally put most of my creative energy into. And I have a team that supports me. So, I definitely do not have time, and I would not have time to create a podcast and edit it myself and do all of the, kind of repurposing of that across different channels. Like, it just wouldn't happen if I didn't have a team. So I have a team that help me edit the podcast. I outsource that. And then personally, I have a VA, and I also have a content manager. And so the podcast is a really great example. I love my podcast process because it's one of the processes where I do the creative work. I do the creative thinking. I, write my notes, I record it, and then I literally hand it over. And there's this beautiful process that happens where I do have, kind of a review in the middle of it, but it goes out to this team, and then my team internally do the rest of their magic and turn it into, a reel, and put it on the website as a blog, and they upload the show notes, so they do all of it, which is amazing. And so the answer to your question is I have help. I have support to make it happen. But the podcast is definitely where I put most of my energy into. And because I do a mix of guest and solo episodes, it's a lot of rich content in there, and I know you would know this from, obviously having your podcast. It is a big effort. Like, creating a podcast isn't just something that, is writing a social media post. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, but it is very rich in terms of, the like repurposing essentially. And so we will take that and we will repurpose it, across channels and kind of share it as a podcast. But then we might take that and share it as a social media post carousel. And then maybe 3 months later, that exact same carousel will be repurposed into, a reel, or different ways that we can use that content. I know we also will often use, so any podcasts that I release during a launch period 6 months prior, those podcast episodes will often turn into kind of sales emails during the next launch. So we kind of essentially make the most of that hero piece of content as much as we can, to maximize our time. And then when we might be in like a launch, or preparing for a launch, or doing kind of a sales season, whatever that looks like, I'll talk to my content manager, who does do a lot of copywriting for me, and we'll kind of have a bit of a chat about, okay, well, what's going on with clients at the moment? Where are they at? What are they doing? What questions are they asking? What are people finding challenging at the moment? And so we'll kind of brainstorm based on the work that I'm doing with clients right now, what, is their biggest challenges, and then we'll create content that's based around that. And, she'll take my word vomit when I jump into Slack and kind of, just she'll ask me a question, and I'll just, speak to the question, answer the question in this very roundabout way. She'll take that and turn it into, something that makes sense. And then I'll review it and we'll put it out. It's very much a collaborative process, which is really nice. But I definitely have support, and most of it is based on kind of what we're doing on the podcast, which is really nice.
I love that, because the thing about doing a podcast is it is quite time intensive. But as you say, it's really rich in content. So if you can make the most of all of the effort that you're already putting in and do an extra like 10, 20% to turn it into like 10 times the amount of different touch points. And obviously all of those touch points aren't anywhere near the length, but they're just allowing people to find the pieces of information that they need to make the decisions later on about, continuing to follow you, becoming more familiar with you and your offers, and then potentially signing up for one, than they would if there was just like, well, you have to listen to the podcast to get kind of like any rich content. And otherwise it's just kind of like, well, and because that is a massive filter that stops 95% of people getting through, because you've kind of like put a hurdle up in front of them. So it's that thing of, how can you make it work? How can you maximize your input by, in this case, having other people do extra little pieces of the puzzle for you?
Yeah. And, it's a process that, if I had more time, I would probably have more of my hands in that process, And so even if people don't have support in their business right now, you can create a content process for yourself that might not even involve a podcast. I have clients who do, Instagram lives, and that's kind of their kind of meaty piece of content. Or they'll, create videos for YouTube, which I think is amazing. People who are on YouTube are just like, I look at that content and I'm like, that is so amazing, because I know how much effort and time goes into that. Or even like email, people will make their email their kind of piece of content that's their, their hero piece of content that they then repurpose across in multitude of ways. Blogging, all of these things, it doesn't have to be a podcast. I love podcasting personally, but there are other ways to do that. And then you can, of course, create your own process and, use that. If you get smart about where you're putting all of those notes, then you can find them again and be like, oh, amazing. Look at all of these incredible notes I've got. I'm going to repurpose that into something new. And I think it's important to remember that often the message doesn't change that much. I've been business coaching now, exclusively business coaching for over 3 years. And obviously you've been doing it a little bit longer than that. And while content and, how you do certain things has changed because social media changes and that kind of thing changes, like the basics of business, the foundations of business, it's not changing. And so the things that you're talking about, and I would imagine it's the same thing no matter what industry you're in, often the things you're teaching people, sharing with people, the stories might be slightly different and updated, but like the crux, the messaging behind what you're sharing is probably not that different. Like you're probably sharing the same thing often over and over again. And that's how we get our message out there.
Yeah, it's just that the delivery method changes slightly and there'll be different like slight tweaks. Even thinking of like Instagram as a platform, the formats have changed and the various like expectations of followers have changed, but also the platform has grown. So there are people on there who are more like carousel and caption focused because that's how they deliver their messaging. And then there are the people who are very visual. So it's all about what does the image look like? What does the reel look like? And sometimes, there are content creators who can deliver all of their messaging, maybe because they're a photographer or something, in the visuals. And so the audio is not even them. Like they don't own a microphone that's anything special because they actually don't record any audio in any format. But they're still using Instagram. And as these platforms grow and like YouTube and podcasts, as all of these options scale, the options within them also become available because there isn't one way to make any platform work for you. Like there are video podcasts, there are audio podcasts, there are 8-minute episodes, there are 3-hour shows. Like you can figure out whatever works for you, like guest, no guest. Are you going to be, even when you have a solo episode, do you have a friend on to kind of interview you so that there's still some back and forth in conversation? Or you could just have it that all of your episodes are solo and they're like off the top of your head in your car in your lunch break from your day job or whatever. Like you can just make things work for yourself of how is it the simplest for you and how do you show up? And then, okay, well, I already have a virtual assistant, or I want to have a virtual assistant, or if I had a virtual assistant, they could do these 3 tasks for me. And how would that interface and look like?
Yeah.
So it's all about making it work for you, your business, your own capacities, and kind of like your own strengths as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I work with some clients who, are more tech savvy. And so they do a lot of stuff themselves and they find it easy and they enjoy learning stuff, doing those things themselves. And then I've got other clients who, maybe they're a little bit older and they don't love it so much. And they actually invest in that help earlier on because of the amount of time it saves, And so I have these conversations with clients sometimes where I'm like, it's not a hard and fast rule as to when you do this thing, when you outsource. It's like, what is it that you want to achieve in your business? What are your goals right now? And how can we help you get there? And sometimes that is outsourcing certain things perhaps sooner than other people would, but they might be focusing their energy in a different area that is more challenging for them too, right? Like we're not all built the same, and therefore our businesses, the way that we do marketing, the way that we show up, like all of that isn't the same either. And I think that is one of the problems with, going out there and, building your business without any kind of support from anybody. Because if you look out into the online space, like there is so much information out there. There's so many people saying this is the right way to do things. This is the wrong way to do things. And then you'll find someone else who says the exact opposite. Like, it's so confusing if you're somebody who's just starting out in business, looking at all of these things, going like, but what does this mean for me? Like, having somebody who can help you navigate that and like help you go, okay, well, these are the options. This is what you could do, and there's many things you could do, and there's many ways you could make it work, but what's going to suit you the best? Can we make some intentional decisions around how you want to work and how you want to show up and what your strengths are? That's the key.
Yeah. And that's what I love about podcasts so much, and like interviews like this, is that sometimes from the outside looking in, looking at certain businesses, you have to make assumptions about why they do things. And sometimes the assumption that you make is because, well, that's the done thing, that's how it works, whatever. When really it's like, well, when they were 16, they wanted to be a radio host. So now they have a podcast. And like, you're never going to, unless they mention that at some point in a podcast episode, you're never going to know that. And also a lot of the advice that is thrown around there is like, with hindsight, this is what I should have done. And sometimes it's like, and that's what I would have done or did do or whatever 8 years ago when XYZ wasn't available to me. And so it's also that thing of, you have to filter through the information and be inspired by maybe the why behind the thing, and not like, well, my favorite business owner has a podcast, so therefore I should have a podcast. It's how do I approach these things in the same ways and probably end up with a different result, and that's okay too.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I so agree.
Perfect. Thanks so much for clarifying that for me and kind of walking me through all of those things, because what I love to hear about is the stories of progression and why you've done things and how you've changed your services over time to either better suit you or the life that you're in, or just because you discovered this new thing that you now want to do more of, and kind of like the why behind that. So really enjoy that. Let's move into the quick fire. So just some quick questions for you just to kind of get to know you a little bit better. Who inspires you in business?
That's a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind today is my clients. I am constantly inspired by my clients and what they do and how they show up and the incredible range of skills that they have. I'm constantly inspired by my clients. I think that would have to be my my number one today. I'm sure I would answer that question differently tomorrow, but that's who I'm feeling inspired by at the moment.
Perfect. What creative pursuit are you enjoying or feeling drawn to right now in your work or personal life?
Creatively in work, I would have to say I just am loving podcasting, and I've been podcasting now for over 2 years, which is wild because that's gone very quick. But I love it as a process. And in life, I would have to say playing with my kids is just the best. It's fun. I'm not a super creative mom. I'm definitely not a crafty mom, but the imagination that, my eldest now is 4, his imagination just blows my mind, and he'll regularly, tell me he tells me what to do, right? Like, I don't get much say, but it's always fun playing with him and getting creative with him.
That's amazing. What is your favorite place on the internet right now?
So, very timely. I have been playing over on Threads,
Nice.
which is, the new app that Instagram's just released. And I am really enjoying it as an app. So, watch this space. I don't know how long that's going to last for or where that's headed long term, but I'm really enjoying that space online.
Yep, I love that. I think today is like day 5 or day 6 of Threads existing. And I am already, it feels like it's been around for months. I'm like so into it. I love it. It's going to be so good. I'm just kind of like excited but hesitant as to how it will expand as more and more people get on there and as they add more features and whatever else changes, because the first week of something is always very different to the first year. But I'm really excited about it. I love it. What are you looking forward to the most in the next year of business?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I definitely think I am looking forward to having a little bit more structured time in my business next year. So, as I've already talked about, having my youngest in daycare and getting that opportunity to just have some solid time. I'm really looking forward to that, but at the same time, not wishing this time away, and just continuing on this same trajectory. I had someone ask me recently, like, what's next for you in business? And I was kind of like, at the moment, it's kind of just more of the same, because I feel like I've gotten to this really great place of loving what I've created and loving working with my clients in the way that I am, and just doing the thing. And so I'm kind of just in this space of really just cruising at the moment and not necessarily striving for anything massive, which is kind of nice, to have a season of not being in that big business building scaling phase.
That's amazing. Essentially, that's what a lot of people right now will be hoping they had. So I'm glad that you get to enjoy it.
It's possible. It's possible to get there, I promise.
Yeah, love it.
It does require some work, but you can get there.
Yeah. And also a certain amount of patience as well, of like, okay, I'm just going to enjoy this while I have it, because I am not ready for the next stage yet, but I know kind of what it's going to be. Cool.
Yes, yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Amazing. What are you looking forward to the most in the offline world in the next year?
I think it's more of, being a mum and being with my kids and seeing where, they go, and how they continue to grow. My youngest will be walking soon, he'll turn 1 soon, so there's lots in that, like, 1 to 2 year old space in the next year, which I'm excited for. Having been there, done that, that's a really, really lovely time, before they kind of get to that age where they tell you no and they're in charge. Um, so I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, that's consumes my world pretty much. And I've also just, really recently in the last 6 months moved towns. So we now live at the coast. And so I'm really looking forward to summer and being here like a full summer where we can enjoy the long evenings and go to the beach and just like really be living the coastal dream. Right now it's winter, and so it's a little bit like, I'm not a big ocean swimmer anyway, and so it's very much like we'll go to the beach and rug up, and I can't wait for summer. So looking forward to that for sure.
That's amazing.
Mm.
If someone is listening to this episode and they want to grow their own business, what is the one thing you recommend they do or evaluate next?
Oh, that's a good question, and very much depends on where you're at and what you need to do. And so my recommendation is something that I see clients do or people in my community do is sometimes make a problem where one does not exist. So, for example, you might see someone online doing something that you don't necessarily do in your business, or you don't have organized yet, or you're not at that point where that's a priority, and you go, oh well, maybe that should be my priority. And so you're then creating something new for yourself to do, or you think you're wrong because you haven't organized that thing yet or done that thing yet. And so what I would really, really recommend you do is get clear on what your goals are, number one, what you're working towards, and then what the things are that are actually going to help you achieve those goals, and just stay really focused on that and solve the problems that you need to solve to get there, as opposed to getting distracted by anything else. And there's a lot that can distract you. And so just if you can be laser focused and potentially get some support to help you decide what those things are that are actually going to help you get to the goal that you have and kind of stay focused on those things, then that is what I would recommend. And just really be mindful of those things that are coming into your orbit of like, is this a priority for me right now? And it's okay to have things on like your wish list, and to park them for future. There's so many things that I've parked as to something that I want to do in the future, or this is the next step, this is the next layer of marketing, for example, that we're going to add on. A good example of this is, you might see someone share that Pinterest is like the best way to grow your business, And so then you go, oh, well, I need to be on Pinterest. And it's like, well, Pinterest can be really great, sure. But like, is that really the thing you need to be putting your time and effort into right now? Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. And so, that can be something you can park and go, one day when I have more time, or when I've got more support in the business, and when I know what I'm doing on Pinterest, then, I'll add that layer in. But right now that might not be my priority, because my priority is this thing. And so I would really, that's my advice. Stay focused on your goals and not get distracted.
I love that, because what I have is a new ideas notebook. And unless it is time to evaluate all of the things, the new ideas stay in the notebook. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they will graduate to Notion, because I have too many thoughts and I don't want to be writing them. My hand can't keep up. Or like I'll do a voice memo or whatever, and then I'll just like let it be, because today is not the day that I have the capacity to evaluate whether this fits with my goals. So I'm just taking note of it and like keeping it for later so I don't forget about it. But today is not the day I get to make that decision, because either I don't have the capacity, or like I'm all in my feelings about that idea and why I should or shouldn't do it and whatever. And it's just if I can evaluate with all of the pieces, then I'll end up with the best decision for me, basically. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Cool.
I so agree. Get a new ideas notebook, everyone.
Yes. Yeah. And whether it's a physical notebook, or like the app on your phone, the notes app on your phone, or like Notion or whatever, where you want to brain dump stuff, or voice memos, like whatever works for you, as like the way to not forget about the good ideas. But like knowing that you don't have to do it today for it to be valuable. Perfect. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me. This has been amazing to chat with you and learn all about your business, and also know of like what are the things that are coming down the pipeline for you that are so interesting. And I hope that you really enjoy your time of know new things and doing the same as you are currently doing, and living in the moment and loving it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a really fun chat today.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Digital Hive podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend or on Instagram and tag me at Honeypot Digital. To find out more about Honeypot Digital and the work I do, or to find more episodes of the podcast and handy tips for small businesses marketing online, head to honeypotdigital.com.